Lions Pride, let's roll. Welcome to the den where it doesn't matter if you're a Lions fan, but I think you should be one. And in today's video, we will be going over what I view to be the top 10 teams in the NFL at the current moment. Everyone knows week one is always a bit of a cluster truck when it comes to what's happening in the NFL. So some teams won't be on here that you might think should be. For instance, I've got the Saints that are not on this list, although they did have a 47-10 blowout win over the Panthers. The main reason behind that is purely due to the fact that the Saints are an average team and the Panthers are terrible. Of course, the Saints may prove me wrong in following weeks, but I just want to see a little bit more before I end up putting them in the top 10. We'll see how they do in their next game. Starting off today's list, we're going to start with two honorable mentions that could potentially be in the top 10, but due to the play that they had over the weekend, I just do not see them being there yet. First off, we'll start with the Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams coming off of a big loss to the Detroit Lions, but they were very competitive in that game, and the Lions are a top tier team in the NFL at the moment. Looking at the statistics for this game, Matt Stafford played really, really well overall. He had 317 yards on 449 pass attempts with 44 completions, averaged about 6.5 every time he threw the ball. He had a touchdown, and of course, he had that really costly interception in the end zone. He did take 2 sacks, and his QBR wasn't all that good, but overall, the Rams did very, very good over the weekend. Rushing, Kyren Williams needs to get more production. You just need a little bit more from him over the season, and you'll see how that progresses. Moving on to our second honorable mention, I have the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins coming off a win of the Jacksonville Jaguars, where, if I'm being completely honest, I expected a little bit more from Tua and Tyreek and Jalen, and just making sure that that game was less competitive than it ended up being. The defense did look solid in that second half, preventing Trevor Lawrence and his team from barely scoring anything at all in that second half, and the offense did come alive. Looking at statistics for this game, Tua went 23 for 37, had 338 yards, averaging about 9.1 every time he dropped back to throw. He also had a touchdown, no interceptions, and he did take 3 sacks on the night. Of course, you're wanting to see a little less of the sack rate from Tua, but those rods are really good. Just wanting a couple more touchdowns along with that. Of course, with your rushing, you had a total of 81 yards. Want to see a little bit more from people like Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert, but overall, the game was a win, so you're taking it good. I just do not believe that they performed well enough to put them in the top 10 of teams at the moment. Of course, they may prove me wrong next week when they go to take on the Buffalo Bills, but we will see how the game progresses past that point. Coming in at number 10 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers looking pretty solid over this weekend. Baker Mayfield threw for 4 touchdowns, had a ton of yards on the ground. Overall, this was an extremely good game for the Buccaneers overall. Some of the Saints fans might be angry that they're like, well, you're giving the Bucs a good spot over them. Of course, I think the Panthers are going to be the worst team in the NFL based on that performance they had. Bryce Young did not look good. I cannot tell how the Saints looked totally. We'll see how the Buccaneers perform against the Lions this week in a playoff rematch. However, I still think that the Buccaneers could potentially win that game and should be in the top 10 for now. Going to statistics for this game, Baker Mayfield went 24 for 30 for 289 yards and 4 touchdowns total. Your rushing attack, you had 112 total, and you had Mike Evans with 2 touchdowns, even though he wasn't your leading receiver. Your defense was looking good, prevented the Commanders from scoring only 20 points in this game. Overall, I'd be very happy if I'm a Buccaneers fan. I think you have a very high chance of repeating winning this division once again. Coming in at number 9 on my list is the Dallas Cowboys. Now, some Cowboys fans may not like that they're this low on the power rankings after they just beat the living shit out of the Cleveland Browns. However, I think that was mainly due to the fact that Deshaun Watson does not look good right now. I don't know if that's due to the fact of the rust or he's just not a very good quarterback, which is probably the case. But I want to see a little bit more from that defense. You're going to be up against the Saints in this upcoming week. That's just scored 47 on the Panthers. Of course, even though the Panthers aren't that good, I want to see how your defense holds up against a team that we know can score a lot of points. For statistics this time around, Dak Prescott went 19 for 32, had 179 yards and 1 touchdown. For rushing, there was 25 total attempts by the team. You had Cooper Rush was at -1. Unfortunate since he has Rush in his last name. But total, you had 25 for 102 rushing. CeeDee Lamb is coming back, 5 receptions for 61, no touchdowns. Your only touchdown on the air was Brandon Cooks with 1. I think overall you're really happy with how Brandon Aubrey performed today with the kicking. 4 for 4 on field goals and 3 for 3 on extra points, 57 being his long on there. Had a total of 15 points, which was half of your team's points in total, which is where it comes from. In the game against the Saints, you're hoping that those touchdowns can increase. I think that defense won't be quite as good as what the Browns have, so you should be able to score more touchdowns instead of field goals. But you know you can if you need to with Brandon Aubrey. So, based on those facts, the fact that there wasn't a ton of offense production, in my opinion, I'm going to be putting them at number 9. Coming in at number 8 on my list is the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills are coming off of a good win against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, that game was very competitive, in my opinion. I did not think that the Bills were going to be quite as competitive with the Cardinals as they were, and that's mainly due to the fact that I thought Josh Allen would come alive earlier than the second half. We want to see a little bit more from the play calling of the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator this year, as Josh Allen only had 2 throws going into the 2-minute warning at just before halftime. Of course, he came alive in that second half, throwing for 2 touchdowns and rushing for 2 as well. But overall, you're pretty good. You're going to want to see a lot more in this game against the Dolphins. This is the Dolphins' home opener, but I trust the Bills usually win against the Dolphins, especially in the current era. Going for statistics, Josh Allen went 18 for 23, 232 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the air. He also rushed for 39 yards, and he also had 2 touchdowns. In total, your team rushed for 130 yards on 33 attempts. Keon Coleman was your leading receiver with 4 receptions for 51 yards. You're going to want to see a little more out of your defense. They led about 28 points to the Arizona Cardinals, who people don't think is all that good, without the Cardinals even involving Marvin Harrison Jr. in the game plan. So, wanted to see a little bit more from them before I put them higher on this list. But overall, the Bills did really good, and I think that they deserve the number 8 spot on my list. Coming in at number 7 on this list is going to be the Green Bay Packers. Now, this is a very contentious spot, and like I was saying about week 1, a very contentious spot for a lot of these teams. The Green Bay Packers coming off of a heartbreaking loss against the Philadelphia Eagles in Brazil. Of course, with this game, losing Jordan Love for probably an extended period of time, 3 to 6 weeks is what it's seeming to be. Although Matt LaFleur did have some positive news that they think he may be able to start sooner than that, potentially in the next 2 or 3 games. The reason I say that, they have not placed him on IR, so they think he'll be back in about 3 weeks. Am I stupid? Like, am I retarded? Coming in at number 7 on my list is the Green Bay Packers. The Packers coming off of a big loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, which is a bit contentious, putting a loser in the power rankings. However, they played that game extremely competitive against a Saquon-led Eagles offense. Looking at stats for this game, Jordan Love went 17 for 34 for 260 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, and there was a pick in there that was a little costly to the team. He also took a sack for 5 yards. The big news with that is that Jordan Love will be out for 3 to 6 weeks, they think. However, good news for Packers fans is that they have not placed him on IR, so they probably assume that he will be back within that 3-week range. Looking at rushing for this team, Josh Jacobs did not look good in that first half, but the second half did come alive. In total, your team went 21 for 163 yards, averaging about 7.8, and you did have a touchdown by Jaden Reed on the ground. Receiving wise, you're really happy with how Jaden Reed performed this week. 4 for 138, averaging 34.5 yards a reception. He also had a touchdown on this, which you're really happy about. As for your defense, didn't look terribly great, but part of that is due to the fact that your defense was slipping all over the place last night. So we'll see how you guys the defense performs against the Colts in this upcoming week. Overall, though, I think even with Malik Willis, there's a lot of talent on this team, and this team deserves to be at number 7. Coming in at number 6 on my power rankings is going to be the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens coming off of a heartbreaking loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, where they literally lost by a toe. Overall, with this team, you should be pretty happy with how the performance. Once again, this is the reigning Super Bowl champs, and they have an astounding defense. You may have only scored 20 points, but the overall game was much more competitive than it might seem. Looking at the stats for this game, Lamar went 26 of 41 for 273 yards and 1 touchdown in the air. He also had 16 carries for 122 yards on the ground, which I think was the 4th or 5th time that he has done that in his career, having a 100-yard game on the ground. For your receiving, Isaiah Likely came alive, 9 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. Of course, he should have had another one, but his toe was just a toe width too big. Overall, you should be really happy with how the defense performed, holding the Kansas City Chiefs with a revamped secondary and Travis Kelce on that team to only 27 points is a fairly good number. Coming up next, you have your home opener versus the Raiders, which based on how the Raiders performed last week against the Chargers, should be a bounce back game for you guys. Hopefully that O-line can look a little improved against a defensive line that should be pretty good in the Raiders coming into week 2. Overall, I did think they did a valiant job and deserve the number 6 spot on the power rankings. Coming in at number 5 on my list is going to be the Houston Texans. The Texans coming off a big win against the Indianapolis Colts, where CJ Stroud, although he didn't look perfect, did look pretty good. And Joe Mixon seems to be an addition that the Texans are going to love, having 153 yards. That doubled what the Texans were averaging last year on an entire team basis. Looking at stats for this game, CJ Stroud went 24 for 32, total 234 yards and 2 touchdowns. Relatively good, lower yards than you expect, but having into the 230s during this week was actually very good. On the other side of things, on the rushing attack, Joe Mixon went 30 for 159 and a touchdown. He is averaging 5.3 a carry at the moment. In total, your team had 213 total rush yards, meaning that your team overall was very, very solid in both the pass and rush attack. Your leading receiver was Nico Collins with 117 yards, although Stephon Diggs had very good production in the end zone. He went 6 receptions, 33 yards, and had 2 touchdowns. So you're going to hope that he becomes your red zone threat, while Nico Collins and Tank Dell end up being that deep receiver threat and the middle of the ground threat. Defense looks solid, although you do want to see a little bit more protection against the deep ball and a little bit more pass rush getting towards the quarterback. Overall, I think this team is going to be very competitive throughout the season. I think they're going to win a lot of games by CJ Stroud basically willing it, and Joe Mixon now being an absolute workhorse in the run game. So overall, I think that they deserve that number 5 spot on my list. Coming in at number 4 on my power rankings will be the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles coming off of a big win against the Green Bay Packers in Brazil, scoring 34 points and looking like a completely different offense under Kellen Moore. Of course, you want to see a little bit more from that defense, letting the Packers score 29 in total, but part of that is most likely due to the fact that the field was very slick last night. Looking at stats for this game, Jalen Hurts went 20 for 34, 278 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, but he also had 2 picks as well. You're thinking part of that might be due to the fact that that field was overall really slick, but we'll see how he performs in their upcoming games. The thing you're really happy about is Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley had 24 carries for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had a receiving touchdown as well with 33 yards in the air. Your leading receiver, of course, A.J. Brown with 119, and Devonta Smith also looked really, really good with 7 receptions for 84 yards. Jalen Hurts had some issues with the turnover problems this game. 2 fumbles in total. He lost 1. Also had those 2 interceptions. And of course, Saquon did recover that one that was supposed to be on an Eagles QB sneak. You want to see a little bit more from the defense, preventing them from having quite as many good yards, and letting someone like Jaden Reed get 119 is not great. However, you're going to see how that performs this week when you're not on a slick field. Overall, I think the Eagles did a very good job in this game. The offense looked completely different. It actually looked like a real team under Kellen Moore. And Vic Fangio has a little bit to work on with his secondary room, but I think they did a good job getting everything cleaned up this week. So we'll see how they progress throughout the rest of the weeks, and that is number 4 on the list. Coming in at number 3 on this list is my Detroit Lions. The Lions coming off of a huge win over the Los Angeles Rams, which I was stressed during. Of course, the Lions secondary has been revamped, and holding Matt Stafford to 317 yards and a single touchdown is actually a very good day for that secondary. Of course, on the defensive side of the ball, there were a couple issues that took place. Terrion Arnold having those 2 costly penalties in the end zone that let the Rams get to the end zone was very, very questionable. However, holding those teams to field goals in the red zone very efficiently this season. We're going to want to see a little bit more from that secondary room and the communication that's taking place, but I think overall they did a very good job improving that secondary. Looking at statistics for this game, Jared Goff went 18 for 28, had 217 yards, 1 touchdown, and an interception, which we don't like to see, but it's bound to happen, especially when he hasn't played since last year at the NFC Championship game. The real highlight of this game was the rushing attack. David Montgomery went 17 for 91 yards and 1 touchdown. A huge chunk of those yards were in that overtime drive where they just went down the field and David Montgomery imposed his will against that defensive line. You're also liking that because the offensive line is looking fantastic. It is definitely considered the best offensive line in the league. As for the receiving attack, Jameson Williams had a crazy game. 5 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown, averaging 24.2 every single time he got the ball. Of course, some of that is a statistical thing. He did have a 52 long pass that was caught, so we'll see how he progresses throughout the next couple games. Big questions to this game. Amon-Ra only having 3 receptions for 13 yards and 6 targets only on the game. Sean McVay did a great job of preventing Amon-Ra from having production, But now that we have Jamison Williams, it's going to look a lot better. When it comes to the Lions, overall, this game was way too close for me to put them at number 2, which was where I was like them to be. But they played very efficient football and should only get better from here on out. We'll see how they perform against the Bucs in this upcoming game. And go Lions! Coming in at number 2 on this list, it brings me a lot of pain to put these guys here, but they played a phenomenal game, is the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners coming off of a blowout win against the New York Jets, where the Jets really only scored about 10 points in this game before they subbed in Tyrod Taylor, and most of the defense was off of the field during that final drive. Overall, the Niners were looking really efficient in football. They had really long drives that were sustained with touchdowns or field goals, chewing a ton of clock. Overall, that was a demolition game against the entire Jets team. Looking at stats for this game, Brock Purdy went 19 for 29, 231 yards, no touchdowns, unfortunately, but that's okay since a lot of that was on the ground anyways. The thing you're loving to see on this is Jordan Mason, 28 carries for 147 yards and 1 touchdown. Deebo Samuel also had a touchdown on the ground, but only went for 23 yards in total. What you're liking to see from this is now you can do a split backfield with Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason. This is going to be extremely good for your offense and should lead to a lot of sustained wins. The defense also looking really good in the run game against Breece Hall and preventing Aaron Rodgers from having really any production at all, keeping Rodgers to only about 167 yards and 1 touchdown in that game. Overall, if the Niners can sustain that sort of play, it should be a very good season for them, and I can't wait to see how this team looks come December. Coming in at number 1, which should be no surprise to anybody, is the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs coming off of a huge win against the Baltimore Ravens, which was an AFC Championship rematch, in which the Chiefs defense still looks amazing, preventing that team from having very many touchdowns at all and only having 20 points on the entire game is a huge boon to them. Of course, people like Xavier Worthy with 2 touchdowns and looking super fast. Rashee Rice is turning into that wide receiver 1 that they thought they would, and Travis Kelce is just him. Isaiah Pacheco also looking pretty good, and Patrick Mahomes is just the greatest quarterback in the NFL at the moment. Looking at the stats for this game, Patrick Mahomes went 20 for 28, had 291 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Of course, you never like to see interceptions, but if you win the game, you can overlook it for the time being. Isaiah Pacheco went 15 for 45 and had a touchdown. You're wanting to see a little bit more from that run game, but overall against the Ravens defense that is really good, that's a pretty good number, and in total, your team had 20 carries for 72 yards. Of course, the one that you're really liking to look at is Xavier Worthy with 21 rushing yards and a touchdown. Receiving, Rashee Rice is your leading receiver with 7 receptions for 103 yards with no touchdowns, but Xavier Worthy looks like he could be a red zone threat, getting another touchdown in the air as well. So, in total, the Kansas City Chiefs are looking really good coming into this season, are trying to keep that three-peat dream alive, and that is why they are number 1 on my list. So, just to recap this, we have the Chiefs at number 1, the 49ers at number 2, the Lions at 3, the Eagles at 4, Texans at 5, Ravens at 6, Packers at 7, Bills at 8, Cowboys at 9, and the Buccaneers are my 10th team on my power rankings. Overall, what do you think of the power rankings? Would you agree with what I said? Do you think I have some problems with my power ranking listing? How would you rank the top 10? Overall, if you have any comments related to that, make sure to leave them down below. Overall, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see everybody Thursday for a live stream between the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. Other than that, have a great day, and Lions Pride, let's roll!